When they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him along with the criminals, one on his right and the other on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Christ of God, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was written a notice above him which read, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God," he said, "since you're under the same sentence. We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus answered him, "I tell you the truth. Today you will be with me in paradise." It was now about the 6th hour, and darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour, for the sun had stopped shining. And the curtain in the temple was torn in two. Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." When he had said this, he breathed his last. The centurion, seeing what had happened, praised God and said, "Surely this was a righteous man." When all the people had gathered to witness this sight, saw what took place, they beat their breasts and went away. But all those who knew him, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance, watching these things. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? It's the opening line of a song that is believed to have been written by African American slaves. Somehow they saw in the suffering of Jesus their own suffering. They say that one of the ways in which you can read the Bible and understand it is to put yourself in the scene so that you can see what's going on from another perspective. I remember the first time I ever saw this scene, the scene of Jesus on the cross. My grandmother had bought myself and my brothers at the time, when I was 6 years old, a Bible, a picture book Bible. And I can remember when we got it, it was a large book, and I remember opening it and thinking about what would it be like to look at that scene where Jesus dies on the cross. I bet that's a gruesome picture. I remember turning to the page, and actually, I guess because it was a children's Bible, the scene was from a long distance. But even as a 6-year-old, as soon as I saw it, tears started to come down my cheeks. I can remember looking at the picture, seeing the scene, and all I could notice on this man in the middle cross was these red dots that marked where his hands had been pierced and where his feet were pierced. And there was something in me, even as a 6-year-old, that was moved by what I saw. I've gone back to that scene so many times over the years, and every time I look at it, I see something more. I've put myself in the scene, as I say, just to try and understand it. I put myself in the place of Mary, Jesus' mother, as she's there at the foot of the cross, seeing her son dying this agonizing, brutal death. And from her perspective, I imagine any parent who's had to watch the death of their own child, and I think how horrendous that must have been. I've looked at the scene from the eyes of the crowd that stood around and watched all that was going on. And I've placed myself in that crowd, this very crowd that probably earlier on were some of the ones who would have been calling for the crucifixion of Jesus. and have followed the scene all the way, seeing Jesus carry his cross to this moment, to the hill of Golgotha, and have watched every moment that has taken place and seen the soldiers do what they did. And to them, maybe it was it was a sport. It happened on a regular basis. But I don't think I've ever seen this scene through the eyes of the centurion. The centurion who is off perhaps to the side. And it says, Luke, as he captures this scene, says, the centurion, seeing what happened, praised God and said, surely this was a righteous man. On his watch, as it were, his eyes were opened to see who Jesus was and to see himself in the light of that. He's the centurion. He would have been the one responsible for what the other soldiers were doing that day. He would have been the one barking out the orders. You two, strap him to that post. You two, take those whips and scourge his life. Whip him. You, take that beam, strap it across his back. You, drive him down the street. Pick him up when he falls down. You two, get those nails out of that bag. You, take the hammer. You, make sure those nails go through his hands and pin him to the cross. He would have been the one that would have barked out all those orders and made sure that he saw to it that the crucifixion was carried out in the way that his bosses, as it were, would have wanted it done. But something happened in that scene to change the way in which he saw this man upon the cross. His day began barking out orders, but his day ended with him praising God for who this man was upon the cross. His eyes had been opened to see something of who Jesus was. And interestingly, of all the people in that scene, this centurion was the only one who praised God for what was happening. I don't know if it was because of what the soldier had said, but listen to what Luke says as it goes on in the story. When all the people who had gathered to witness, to see the sight they saw, to see what took place, they beat their breasts and they went away. But all those who knew him, including the women who had followed from Galilee, stood at a distance, again watching these things. What do you see as you look at the cross this Good Friday in this particular year? I see that in Jesus we see one who knows our pain. When you think of the events of this past year, what we see in actually God upon the cross is one who understands what we experience, what we go through. When I look at Jesus through the eyes of the centurion, the one who has just ordered and carried out the instructions for putting Jesus on the cross, I see one who looks at us, he looks at us who cause one another incredible pain, and he understands. As I look at Jesus on the cross this year, I look at one who looks back at us and sees the brutal death of someone like George Floyd, who dies under the knee of a police officer in an unjust way, and he understands. I see in Jesus one who suffers the brutal, cruel death of someone like Sarah Everard. And yet he understands somehow the pain that she and her family are going through. I see in Jesus as he's on the cross, having been betrayed by the very ones who were closest to him. I see him as he looks at a man like Ravi Zacharias, a Christian respected speaker who completely has betrayed the very thing that he believes in. I see when we look at the person of Jesus on the cross, one who sees the worst that we do to one another, and he's experienced it himself, and he understands our pain. Isaiah, the prophet in the Old Testament, when he looked ahead to the anticipated coming Messiah, he said, "But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed." Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Those that penned those very words saw in Jesus one who understood their suffering, and somehow by his suffering their wounds were healed. The centurion and his perspective helps me to see the power of the cross. What do you see as you look at the cross this Good Friday?
Oh, to see the dawn of the darkest day, Christ on the road to Calvary, tried by sinful men, torn and beaten, then nailed to a cross of wood. This the power of the cross. Christ became sin for us, took the blame, bore the wrath. We stand forgiven at the cross. Oh, to see the pain written on your face, bearing the awesome weight of sin. Every bitter thought, every evil deed, crowning your blood-stained brow. This the power of the cross. Christ became sin for us, took the blame, bore the wrath. We stand forgiven at the cross. Now the day